We are thrilled to now welcome in Howard Bryant of ESPN, NPR Weekend Edition Saturday, and the author of Full Dissidence, one of his latest books, and John Carlos, who you may remember from the 1968 Summer Olympics, who stood on the podium with his fist high to the heavens, wearing a glove. Fellas, we appreciate the time and you joining us. In the aftermath of all of this, now that so much has wound down and the attention is a little bit less, how does sports take the next step at actionable change in your mind? Howard, why don't we start with you?
Well, first, thanks for having me on the show. It's good to see you again, Arash. I feel that we're not in the aftermath yet. I think that's the first thing. Where are we in this story? And obviously, I think that when I think about tangible change, that's the key word, tangible. What is actually going to change? What's going to be done? And I think there are so many different areas where there's movement for change. And obviously, John can talk about this way more than I can from personal experience. But to me, the number one thing that I think we need to do, and that has to happen in this industry, is you cannot punish athletes, and especially Black athletes, the way that they have over the past 50 years. That I've been asking myself this question, and I've been asking it of readers in my books, which is, why is the punishment so high for advocating for Black people? Why is the price your entire career? And I think it's something that people don't pay nearly enough attention to. And I think that when you talk about structural change, you cannot sanction people with their careers for having an opinion and for advocating for African Americans.
Could this be the watershed moment, guys, in your mind? John, do you think in the aftermath of all of this, with the team saying what they did, with the league saying what they did, that athletes will not pay the personal consequence that you and Tommy Smith and so many others, including Kaepernick, have made?
Oh, it's necessary to make the personal sacrifice merely because these are just deeds of words. We have to see tangible evidence that they are serious about making the adjustments and necessary changes to have a level playing field. For instance, Bank of America said we're going to throw out $1 billion. What does that mean? Does that mean that you're about making change, or it mean that you're trying to buy me? I'd just like to know, what do they mean in terms of change? As for the athletes, as for the individuals that's marching in the streets, we have to come to the round table and decipher what we want and put it down to negotiation to make sure. Let me just make one statement relative to what's happening with law and order and so forth in this land. I hear that a lot of police are resigning because the chief took a knee or the lieutenant took a knee. And this thing can be resolved very easily. Behind the blue shield, individuals in that group, they know who the racist police are. They know who the bigots are on the police department. And all they have to do is weed them out.
It's all about accountability, right? I mean, this is the thing that we talk about in every other part, in every other occupation. If I write a story about John and it's full of lies, I get sued for libel. My career's over. If John's a doctor and he operates on the wrong leg, he gets sued for malpractice. Why is it that the police are the one industry where they're completely indemnified from their own corruption and their own mistakes? You have to be able to pay a price. If there's no price, then there's no professionalism, and then you become lawless, which is exactly what's happened.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the accountability on the sports side, guys, because we saw a whole bunch of black squares on Twitter and Instagram last week. We saw so many teams and leagues come out and say, we're committed to this. But fundamentally, the people who have to be held accountable are the owners of pro sports franchises, because they're the bosses of the commissioners of these leagues. Now, let's go back to 4 years ago. There probably isn't a more influential owner in all of North American professional sports than Jerry Jones. What the Dallas Cowboys are, what they represent. And it was Jones who said, quote, "Our policy is that you stand at the anthem, toe on the line." He later said, quote, "The priority is about the flag, and be real clear about that." So since George Floyd's death, though, we haven't been real clear on what Jerry Jones believes needs to be happen, because he hasn't said much. So is the accountability now on Jones and the other owners to step forward?
When you sit back and you think about Jerry Jones put his foot in his mouth you might say, based on the fact that he's considering the president's views opposed to looking at the issues that was confronting the various athletes for them taking a knee or to raise their fists. There was no compassion there. There was no concern about the athletes. We're just going to hold you to the rule.
I actually tend to disagree with you a little bit, Arash. I think they are very clear, and I think they've been very clear through their silence. I think that this is one of the reasons why you pay Roger Goodell all that money, so he takes the public criticism while the owners stay silent. No one has come out. The reason why they didn't mention Colin Kaepernick by name is because they don't want him in their game. There's not a single owner ever since this happened that has come out and said Colin Kaepernick is welcome to play in the NFL. Not only is he welcome to play in the NFL, but he's welcome to play on my team. That has not happened in 3 years. And so to me, that is extremely clear that there is not a league, there is not a corporation in America, as far as I'm concerned, that has been more unambiguous about how it felt about this situation than the National Football League. They've been extremely, extremely clear about this. So the way that they've done the way they've done that sort of 180 tells me that they're trying to find some ground where they can be on the right side of this, but they're not. And then also, I think the most important thing to consider is when you look at this ownership group, look at the money that they give to the Donald Trump campaign. They actually fund a lot of his election and his campaign and his inauguration. And so that tells you much, much more about where they stand. They're caught in the middle of a public national movement, but they're also extremely loyal to him and sympathetic to his positions.
Multiple NFL owners spent 7 figures on Donald Trump's inauguration. John.
Well, I was just getting ready to say this situation with Mr. Kaepernick is parallel to what happened to Muhammad Ali, based on his views, his political views, his social views, in terms of how they tried to strip him of his opportunity to support himself through his profession. This tactic is not a new tactic, what they've done to Mr. Kaepernick. So when you sit back and you say, show me that you're genuine in terms of saying we made a mistake. Don't just give me the sympathy that you made a mistake. Show me how you're genuine with this. Mr. Kaepernick should have a job. You should see as the commissioner that he has a job. Now, relative to how we get to the next level, as I stated, we all have to sit down and be practical about the situation that we're in and try and make a little strive to stamp out this thing called racism.
Yeah, it felt that's an interesting point that you make, John, and further to Howard's sentiment about finding that common ground. Look, Colin Kaepernick hasn't taken a snap in an NFL game since 2016, hasn't taken a snap in any organized football game since the 2016 season. So, color me cynical when I see headlines like the one on Monday when, I see Goodell supports and encourages teams to sign Kaepernick. But what's the common ground here, the realistic common ground here that in your minds would show progress that the NFL, the Jerry Joneses of the world, and other leagues actually want to take this further? What would be some signs? What would be real progress points that to each of you, Howard, we'll start with you, say, you know what? It's not just lip service. They mean it because they're showing us this.
Well, I think the first thing is that let's not speak in pronouns. What is it? And that's been the hardest thing to define. Obviously, when we're talking about this very specific issue, which is protest, as I said earlier, I think you have to make it very clear you're not going to punish players with their careers by advocating a black position or fighting police brutality or whatever the issue is. That's the first thing. So the players don't feel like they are sacrificing their entire livelihood for standing up for what's right. That's the first thing. The second thing is when you look at the industry of sports, it depends on who's getting hired. I think that is the big thing. What we all want is our jobs and opportunities to have a career. And when you look at the gap between who does the playing and who does the coaching and who signs the checks, huge, enormous gap. And one of the big questions that we're having when you're looking at this whole culture thing right now is, okay, African Americans are 12% of the American population, but they're 80% of the NFL. So are you representing that 12% of the culture, or are you reflecting the culture of who plays your sport? And that's the hard part about sports, because it's so dominated by African Americans that once you go away from what they do on the field, it turns right back into America, which is that you don't have any opportunities there. So I think the first thing you do is you don't punish players for having an opinion. And the second thing is your hiring policies have to reflect the industry that you're in.
No need, those policies, I would think that they would consider making change by realizing, as you stated, there's 80% Black participation in the NFL. What's the percentage of Black ownership in the NFL? That would be a tremendous, fill the gap tremendously by letting a Black ownership come about. Now, when you sit back, you think for years the NFL has been going on. We had to fight, I remember, just to get a Black coach. And we're to the state now where we've made so much headlines and reviews and capital gain for the NFL. And then when you sit back and look for ownership, we're not recognized at the table.
Hey, you think about Kaepernick. As of November of last year, 115 quarterbacks had been signed to teams since Kaepernick left the 49ers. And Howard, what you're asking for really doesn't sound like that much. Hey, if we want to make our voice heard, don't blackball us. Don't have us on the outside looking in. Let's have more people of color. Let's have more of a reflection on what our locker rooms look like in our coaches' offices.
Yeah, but Arash, what are we really talking about here? If you look at the pyramid of professional sports, white owners, white coaches, white season ticket holders, white media, Black player. That's the lens through which they're talking about. The reason why the sanction is so severe is because the sport itself is pandering to the white season ticket holders and the white talk radio guys who run the radio shows and who run the media and all of it. So the way that they're funneling their sport isn't through the player, even though there's a huge financial revenue stream from Black consumers, but that's not who they're pandering to. So the real question is going to be, are you selling this sport to everybody, or are you selling this sport to the white gentry that you actually think spends the most on the game? It really is, in a lot of ways, a money issue. If you had a huge number of Black season ticket holders, you don't treat Black players this way because now you're going to lose money.
Well, John, look, what happened to you, what happened to Muhammad Ali, what happened to so many Black athletes of the past is just unconscionable. But now I watch that video that the NFL players produced, and I see Super Bowl MVP Patrick Mahomes. I see Deshaun Watson, one of the faces of the league. OBJ, who's part of marketing campaigns. Michael Thomas, one of the dynamic receivers. When you see players of that stature speak out the way those guys did, for somebody who ultimately had to deal with what you had to deal with after 1968, what does that mean to you to see the superstars, not just stars, not just Pro Bowlers, but the mega stars of the league take that stance?
Well, when you sit back, I think Mr. Smith was a mega star at the Olympic Games. Mr. Norman was a mega star at the Olympic Games, as well as Muhammad Ali was the mega star in the ring. So when you sit back and think, we were individuals at a time when we were so far and few in between because we were so far ahead of ourselves, you might say. Now, when you sit back and think about what happened back 52 years ago, we were like the gardeners or the horticulturists. We planted seeds. And I made a statement to him 50 years ago and said, if you think that John Carlos is a problem because he wants to be recognized and respected as a man, if you think I'm a problem, wait for the next generation. Well, the next generation is here. All these young individuals are aware of who they are ethnically, socially, morally, and they have no fears in terms of presenting themselves for the better, for the future, for their kids. Because most of these guys are young, as I was 23 years old at that time. These individuals are 23. But I think they're not focusing on themselves as much as they're focusing on their children, their children's peers, to make it better for them. They realize that their kids not going to jump up and be a superstar athlete just because they are, but they will never walk out of their skin. They will always be Black.
So a generation, maybe 2 generations ago, Jim Brown and Lou Alcindor and Bill Russell and Muhammad Ali gathered. And now you have this group of athletes, not just NFL, but we've seen so many athletes from so many different sports who have protested and spoken and marched. Is this naive of me to think that if they continue to put their foot on the accelerator and to push for progress and to push for conversations, that they will not be persecuted the way those in previous generations like John were? Is that naive of me, or can that be realistic if you're a star today?
No, persecution is part of the fabric. You're going to be persecuted because you stand up and say, hey, man, get your foot off my neck. You know, the problem has been in the past, many individuals had fear to offend their oppressors. You know, just like Mr. Floyd is on the ground and this man's applying pressure to his neck. The same oppression that cop applied to his neck to take his life, we as citizens of this nation or citizens of the world, which is humanity, has the right to stand up and say, I can endure what you give me, but I'm not turning back. I'm not going back in time, as you told my father in the First World War, give us time, your day is coming. When I came to the Olympics, give us time, your day is coming. And Mr. Kaepernick's day, give us time, your day is coming. While these kids are here saying, my day is here and I'm not turning away. I'm gonna be here today, tomorrow, and the next day until we come to the table to make a difference in this society.
The one difference I will say, Arash, that I see in John, I wonder how you feel about this too, is that the number of corporations that have gotten on board that had always been silent before. So now you're starting to see the money change. When you see the money move, then this culture starts to move a little bit as well.
They have never one time, and give me a one-liner, where Macy's, Target, AutoZone, or any major store in this United States of America ever came out and made a one-line statement about, I detest what is happening to Black people relative to law enforcement in this country. I detest the killing of these various individuals in this country. I detest the fact that they killed a young Black kid in the park playing with a cap gun. I detest a woman dies in the jail alone by herself. I detest a man in the back of a police car with his hands tied behind his back, handcuffed, and then all of a sudden you come up and hear about he had a gun and he pulled it out and shot his brains out. I detest this. I've never heard one major company in the world ever do that relative to the plight of people of color, Blacks in particular in this nation.
Well said. Mr. Carlos, Mr. Bryant, we appreciate the time. We appreciate the insight. We hope this is a turning point. Howard, I hear what you're saying. I have the sense that right now, the voice of the athlete has never had as much influence today as it ever had before. That it carries more weight with commissioners, with leagues, with corporate America. That may lead to something moving forward, guys.
Well, what's happening is the sleeping giant is waking up.